Hey folks, welcome all, welcome all to the newest edition of the Absolute Truth Absolutely podcast. That's right, we are back and we are back with a vengeance. This is your host and servant in Jesus Christ, Gio, short for Giovanni El Cristo. Now, there's a few items that I need to get through to cover before we continue with today's subject matter. As you'll notice, we are not live streaming through the old channel, and I call it old, but in reality, we're still trying to gain access to that channel because we've been locked out. We would have preferred to live stream through that channel because we already had a number of subscribers that had added themselves to receive notifications whenever we posted new content to that channel in particular, and we still have not been able to gain access to it. So I continue to ask you for your patience because it would be preferable for us to live stream and add content to that channel, which already had a subscriber base built. Unfortunately, since we did not gain access, we still haven't gained access to that account. We had to open a new account under Absolute Truth Absolutely, the podcast, which is the channel that those of you that are subscribers to the email list have received and are watching now. And again, we'll continue to try to gain access to the original account, but in the interim, we will continue to live stream and add content to the Absolute Truth Absolutely podcast channel. Again, those of you that are subscribed to our email list through my website, giodcblog.com, giodcblog.com, will know what I am speaking of. Number two, please let other people know about what we are attempting to do. If you find that our podcast episodes and the articles that we've posted through the website have been informative and edifying at the same time, please let other people know. Hit the subscribe button on our channel to receive notifications. Now, I have to warn you, being that YouTube nowadays, in some way, shape, or form, is trying to stamp out Christian, biblical Christian, and conservative, socially conservative content, I might warn you that you might have to check back on the channel frequently to see when it is that we are going to live stream. As of now, our schedule will be Tuesdays and Thursdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. That will be the regularly scheduled time during which we will broadcast these live streams. Once again, Tuesdays, Thursdays, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If anything deviates, if anything changes, I will alert our email subscribers. I'll also let you know through the channel about this. So again, I warn you because if anyone has been in tune, aware of what's been going on with respect to Silicon Valley and how they are attempting to squelch out, manipulate away, stamp out conservative content, biblical Christian content, then I also give you fair warning that you might not be alerted if you subscribe to the channel whenever we are going to live stream these episodes or post them. So please stay aware as it pertains to that. The last bit of items or item that we have to directly address is this Victorian era inspired handlebar mustache. That's right. I think it's rather glorious. Some of you, the reason I am addressing this is the last time that you saw me posting any videos or content where you could see my face directly, you had not seen me sporting this facial hair, and now I am. So I think I need to eliminate that, mention that quickly so as to try to preclude people from saying, hey, you're sporting facial hair. Yes, I am sporting facial hair. Again, I do think it's rather glorious. If you don't, well, guess what? It's my face. What else can you do about it? So removing that item from the agenda, I want to proceed with covering what I'd like to comment on, examine. Actually, there is one more thing I'd like to mention. This is of extreme importance. Some people have continued to listen to the podcast episodes that we have posted regularly on the website and through other outlets as well. We're trying to finish finalizing our channel on SoundCloud, as well as through the iTunes podcast store. Once that the podcasts are made available through those channels, then I will alert everyone as well. You will be able to continue to listen to these podcasts as it were. Now we're live streaming them, but nonetheless, you will still continue to be able to listen to them in audio format. I know this is convenient due to the fact that there are people that watch this content when they are home, but sometimes they would like to continue listening to what we're saying, or they haven't, they won't be able to see one particular episode because they won't be able to sit down at home and see it, and they'd like to hear it on the road in their car stereo system. Well, you will be able to continue to listen to these podcast episodes in audio format through the website, jiodcblog.com, jiodcblog.com. You will be able to listen to them through SoundCloud, as well as the iTunes Store. I will let everyone know. I will inform everyone as to when we will post to those outlets, to those platforms shortly. Now, quickly engaging in the subject matter for this edition of the podcast and this particular live stream. I was made aware of this video not too long ago, and let me preface it by giving you a foundation of what it is, an overview of what it is that we're going to attempt to do through this edition of the podcast, this edition of the live stream. I've noticed that throughout the ensuing years, especially during the Obama administration and through the Trump administration, more and more persons whom would denominate themselves as social conservatives and many people whom would denominate themselves as Christians have begun to become more lax as it pertains to their acceptance of homosexuality and other aberrant forms of sexuality. That might scandalize a few people, but I hope that you will continue to listen. I hope you will continue to watch, because I think I can prove through a microcosm, through an example, that this has been nothing less than a subversion by those who would attempt to heap on the Western public something that leads inherently to personal collapse and also societal collapse. Understand that I am approaching this subject matter from a biblical Christian perspective. Again, once I do so, we will be able to see that the propaganda that has been used frequently by persons who would try to normalize something that in the West for many years it was seen as something aberrant, because most people subscribed to the Judeo-Christian ethic. Slowly but surely, America, Great Britain, and other nations in the West have been moving away from that religious foundation that many of these cultures have had into a more secular, some would call it understanding, some would call it ethic. I would not call it any of those things. I would just call it a secularization of society. And this includes many people whom understand that the pillar of Western civilization continues to be the Judeo-Christian ethic, which informs us as to the makeup of the nuclear family. One man, one woman, children, the nuclear family. Many of these social conservatives, we can mention persons whom have even produced videos and content on this matter, including persons like Dennis Prager, continually will inform the public. They will scream loudly from the rooftops that one of the pillars, if not the pillar, of Western civilization continues to be the nuclear family. Curiously enough, though, we've seen that these very same persons whom acknowledge these things are allowing certain individuals whom they are diametrically opposed inherently to that ethic to be a part now of, let's call it cliques or groups, all in the name of political expediency. Allow me to explain. I'll give you an example. Dennis Prager. One of the videos that he has produced for Prager University has to center, as it were, on this character, Guy Benson. Guy Benson is a militant homosexual. And he allowed him, I'm guessing he invited him, I'm presuming he invited him to produce a video for Prager University. And there are various things that are said in that video. But the curious thing about this is, once again, I'd like to highlight the fact that even though there are social conservatives who speak about the importance of protecting the nuclear family, they are starting to bring into the fray, into the fold, certain persons that their way of living is diametrically opposed to that very same ethic that they say that we need to hold on to in order to preserve Western civilization. Homosexuality is inherently contrarian to the Judeo-Christian ethic and the nuclear family that is informed by the Judeo-Christian ethic. How can you have a sustaining effort to protect, to preserve the nuclear family when now you are including persons whom hold views that are diametrically opposed to that very ethic, which is supposedly, according to these people, and I agree in that shape or manner, but they're contradicting themselves by allowing these people into the fold. Of course, you will have, like I mentioned beforehand, certain persons saying, but it's for political expediency. We need to open the tent, as it were, to win political battles. If not, we will never be able to retake the culture. Time out. How has that worked for you? In the ensuing, let's return during the last 50 or 60 years. How successful have social conservatives in the United States been at stopping the incremental encroachment in this pillar of Western society, namely the nuclear family, heterosexual marriage? We haven't. Social conservatives have not. Many biblical Christians have not either, because they continue to capitulate on these matters, specifically denying what the Bible has to say about homosexuality. Folks, and it can't be clearer. I don't care what the Matthew Vines of life say. The Bible couldn't be clearer about this. 1 Corinthians chapter number 6, Romans chapter number 1, verse 18, and on the texts could not be clearer. But now you find that the bulwark, which should be the protection, the protecting agency, as it were, against the normalization of these things, primarily the Church of Jesus Christ, not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm talking about the true Church of Jesus Christ, biblical Christianity. Many persons are simply bowing down, prostrating themselves at the altar of political expediency, cowardice, cult of convenience, all these things that we will either mention in this edition in passing or in other editions, because those subject matters also require a detailed explanation of how we have arrived here. What I'd like to do then, having established that foundation in this particular episode, is to give you a microcosm give you an example of the types of tactics, specifically demagogic tactics, sophist tactics, employed by homosexuals and those that support them, that they have used throughout the years to convince an unwitting public, an ignorant public, to accept homosexuality as simply something that is normal and should be abided by in everyday life. Now, of course, this leads to detrimental aspects in the personal and in the collective. How so, Gio? Well, consider in the personal at first. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, although they might not be willing to say this out loud, they have to publish these statistics, and the media, of course, will not report on this. Every single year, they continue to say that the biggest driver of HIV/AIDS continues to be what? Homosexual sex. I mean, that's obvious, folks, because it is unnatural, and you don't need statistics to prove this. So there is, again, a proof positive of exactly an underlining, a highlighting of what Paul states in Romans chapter number 1, verse 18 and on, that these men, these women that engage in this lascivious behavior, they will feel in their body, they will have the repercussions of their behavior. That's the way it is. That's in the personal. And we can tell many anecdotal tales of how this has affected persons in a very, very negative way. Now, what about the collective? Folks, there have been a few persons, not many, but a few persons that have held strong to the biblical ethic and have warned the American public, more specifically the Western populace, that once homosexuality was normalized, accepted as simply an alternative in the West, what would occur is that there would be a sliding away towards more and more and more debauchery. I remember still, after the decision of Obergefell, that NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, begun by recalcitrant Marxist-Leninist Harry Hay, and also a perverse sodomite. I mean, that's, if you think about it, that's a redundancy, right? A perverse sodomite. Anyways, this sodomite, that organization that he founded, they said, this is not the end. We will now seek to normalize relationships, sexual relationships, between what they call consenting adults. Notice the phrasing here: consenting adults and children. Slowly but surely, we're seeing that descent towards more and more sodomy. Isn't it some of the liberal websites out there that they began to publish? I forget if it was Vox or it was the Daily Beast, I forget now, a few months ago, they had published an anonymous diary video. I don't know how else to call it, the vidcast, what have you, where a man, they were trying to portray a pedophile as being something that's normal because he hasn't in any way, shape, or form touched any girl that he has desired sexually. Notice the perversion that is slowly but surely being administered as a slow venom into the populace to accept as normal things that we had cast away from us because we understood that they were inherently depraved. They are sinful. Now we are beginning to allow their return into our society. And notice that in this case, the most vulnerable are going to be the most vulnerable among us, the children. If you think about it, some people say, no, with the normalization of homosexuality, children would not be affected. I would dare say that a person like Milo Yiannopoulos is proof positive of all the opposite. Furthermore, and I think that we can mention this in passing as well, please think about this as it pertains to the controlling of the public by the elites. Understanding that homosexuals cannot reproduce, lesbians cannot reproduce, which in and of itself is further proof that it is unnatural what they are engaging in. Wouldn't it be another thing that they would add into the pot of keeping a society that is so put to sleep, so numbed to sexual deviancy, including all of the music video, whatever the music industry produces, Hollywood produces in form of reprobate entertainment, etc., etc.? Wouldn't it now be also something that the elite would heap on the public to keep them absolutely numbed to all of the things that are bringing about dire effects to civilization itself? Of course. Mentioning what I said earlier about social conservatives, they should see this and they should denounce it. But guess what? They've already allowed the leaven into their fold. Now the only other option is to say to these people, we no longer want you here because we see the dangers of it. But I happen to think, I would presume, I think I won't be wrong as I say this, many of them will not apologize. Because in many instances, these people are more interested about the viewers. They're more interested about the money that comes in through commercials, etc., than they are in actually preserving the ethic that has allowed us to live, as it were, as the West in and of itself for millennia. But anyways, going back to what I said, I know I've laid down a bit of a foundation here for this. I want you to view with me, and I will use it as a microcosm, this interview that was done, or rather it was a debate, a panel debate that occurred on ITV through Great Britain. If I'm not mistaken, the program's name is Good Morning Britain. And on this panel debate that they had two persons debating the central issue, which is this: should Great Britain pass legislation that would have school children forcibly learn about homosexuality? I'll repeat that again. The central portion, or the central theme topic of this panel debate was going to be, should Great Britain pass legislation where school children would be forced to learn about homosexuality? Some would say, what do you mean learn about homosexuality? Would they give two perspectives about it? Maybe the Christian perspective and the secular perspective? No, it would just be the secular perspective. And on this panel are two persons, one that opposes, one that supports it. The one that supports it is a militant homosexual. You will see it shortly. I will play the clip for you and you will listen and watch it with me. And we will pause intermittently to comment and examine on what is said, because like I mentioned before, what I'd like for the viewer, for the listener to notice is the malicious tactics, specifically the demagoguery and the sophistry that has been used so that unwittingly people would give space, as it were, to these sorts of reprobations, sodomy amongst us. We'll get to that. The other person, whom is a young Christian mother, opposes this plan. And again, we will begin to watch it very shortly and we will comment on it, but I'd like for the listener to keep this in mind, please. We're going to use this as a microcosm, as an example, because you'll notice that these are typically the phrases and ideas and concepts that are promulgated by most of these people, the propaganda that is propagated by most of these people so as to continue, as it were, with what it is that they desire to bring about in society, which is the normalization, the acceptance of homosexuality and other things that they desire to bring about. So keep that in mind. So let's begin playing this. We will pause it intermittently. Please do not become indignant at me, because I think you'll notice that I will pause frequently. But again, there's another aspect that I need to mention about this. There are certain persons that through their very, what shall I call it, manipulative lexicon, they tend to inculcate ideas that in and of themselves have to be examined, because it is through these tactics, these sophist tactics, where we notice that certain ideas are inculcated in the mind and hearts of people without most people noticing, especially if they haven't practiced discernment. So keep that in mind. All right, so here we go. We're going to play the video. We'll pause intermittently.
Is understanding and learning about relationships and learning about life, is that not part of the teaching process that kids could go through?
Now, let me pause. I told you, I know some people would be indignant that I was going to pause intermittently. Gio, we didn't even see 10 seconds and you're already pausing. I want you to notice the tactic here. Folks, if the Russia collusion hoax was not proof positive, was not proof enough that the mainstream media, most of the mainstream media in the West, has a leftist bent to it and are designed, as it were, they have designs on omitting information so as to inculcate propaganda, then I don't know what other evidence should be used to try to convince you of the fact. And this portion of this panel debate proves that. How so, Gio? I want you to think about the way that he formulates the question to this young Christian mother. He is not asking her to develop, as it were, to explain to them in her own words why she is opposed to the matter, which would give us some clarity as to why she believes what she believes and why she opposes this particular legislation or proposal in Great Britain. No, he leads her. He leads her with a question that seemingly acknowledges what he desires for the public to think. Gio, what do you mean? Think about the way that he asked the question. What is there wrong, and I'm paraphrasing here, what is there wrong with children simply learning about everyday life? Notice that in essence, he is equating homosexuality as simply part of the normal course of things, the normal course of life, and making her seem unreasonable through his rhetorical questioning. So you'll notice from the onset that the presenters here of this program, the hosts of this program, are inherently in the camp, undoubtedly in the camp that is trying to help the homosexuals advance their agenda. And understand this, the more that we begin to listen to this, the more that we listen to this, the more evident this will become, especially by the other questions that they ask her. And by the way, these two panelists, specifically the mother, or rather, shall I say, the two presenters, and the person whom is supporting this project in Great Britain and endorsing it and asking the legislators to somehow codify this into law, you'll notice that they use other tactics, and we'll note them shortly, to try to present the young Christian mother, as it were, as unreasonable, which, by the way, remember, for the media, it's about the narrative. It's about sensationalism. It's not about the substance. It's about the narrative. And in this particular clip, you'll also notice that they want to use this young Christian mother as the microcosm, the example, as it were, the prime example of Christians in Great Britain. And they would want to present her, and therefore the rest of the biblical Christians in Great Britain, as being unreasonable, hateful, etc., etc., etc. You know the euphemisms against homosexuals. Therefore, inculcating, notice the propaganda, inculcating all of these subversive ideas in the minds and hearts of the viewing public of Great Britain, and therefore the world, because they also posted this on the internet. I was able to watch this on YouTube. Keep that in mind. We continue.
Of course it is, but there's many things that, you know, in life that you could also say that they need to learn about.
Like what?
Like, you know, the dangers.
Which they do learn about at school, don't they?
Yeah.
Not to a greater depth, and also to do with different opinions.
The dangers of what, sorry?
So the dangers of life, so like what I was saying about murders and rapists and everything in life. I think personally, children are not there for you to brainwash into what your personal opinions are of what makes good relationships just because it's real life.
Do you not think we live in...
Now, let me pause here. Allow me to pause here, because now the militant activist, he will begin to interject. frequently not allowing her to finish her thought. But allow me to say this. You'll notice that what is inherently being promoted here by these presenters through their sophistry is the following idea. School ought to be a place, and by the way, the militant also harps on this, and he implies it when he gives his responses. School ought to be a place where we indoctrinate children as it pertains to social matters. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, dear listener, dear viewer. I was under the impression, because this is how the bureaucrats of the public school system and the politicians have presented to us the public schooling system for a long time in the West. By the way, small side note here. I'm going to let you know I am vehemently opposed to the public schooling system. Any legislation that forces people to do something that they should not, they ought not to do, especially when you're using their own tax money to do it and then forcing them to not only give the money for it, but also forcing them to go to a particular so-called institution, is inherently anti-liberty. It is inherently anti-liberty. The way that the school system is designed in much of the United States and also in Great Britain and in other parts of the West, it is immoral. Telling parents that they have to send their children to school is immoral. But Gio, our children are going to school to learn. No, they're not. The statistics prove that the children are not learning, and even anecdotal evidence tells you that they're not learning. Folks, I was going to make the point, and this side note that I am mentioning here is going to prove my point as I give you this historical example. Is it true or not that bureaucrats, politicians, those that belong to the system, that they make money off of the system, teachers, school principals, etc., 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 have they not continually told us that the school system exists to help parents? Because we understand mom and dad have to work, and therefore they don't have the time to educate their children at home, and therefore these professionals will step in and do the job that you can't do because you have to work for a living. We understand that, so therefore we'll do it. Then one begins to implicitly think, well, they're going to teach my child mathematics, science, literature, history, etc., etc., etc. What is it that has happened traditionally in the school system? Anything but. No, Gio, that's not true. Anything but, folks. The fact of the matter is that, for example, the homeschooling statistics continue to prove that when parents themselves are the primary educators of their children, the education of the children will be far above and beyond what they are taught in public schools, if you can call that teaching. Far more intelligent, far more knowledgeable, far more wise. But no, the bureaucrats can't have that, and the politicians can't have that, especially the politicians that have designs on hurting, as it were, the public. We can't have that. We can't have mom and dad teaching their children. And you'll notice that there is an element of this subversive thought process that runs through this panel debate. We'll eventually get to it. It'll become more and more evident as you and I begin to peruse through this video. But trust me, it'll become more and more evident. And of course, there are those who would try to dismiss what I've just said by saying this is a conspiracy theorist. You can't disprove what someone says by simply using ad hominems. You can't simply say a person is crazy. You have to be able to disprove what it is that they say. Of course, the person that provides these assertions, they have to be able to prove it as well. But I'm giving you a basic overview of what's actually happened. Look up the statistics. I ask you to look up the statistics, and you'll notice that the disparity between homeschoolers and those that are educated, as it were, in the public schooling system couldn't be greater. And that in and of itself should prove something. If you're unwilling to see it, that's no longer my problem. At least I provided you some semblance of evidence to support what I'm saying. Now you can't simply dismiss what I'm saying by using vicious attacks against my character or name calling. Provide the opposite evidence to disprove my point. Otherwise, then simply you're being a child. You're acting like an infantile. Returning to the point here of what is mentioned here, you'll notice now that they're going to continue to harp on this line, as it were, because you'll notice that, again, going back to what I said earlier, school is supposed to be a place where our kids are educated, science, mathematics, history, what have you, literature. And we notice that school is becoming what? A center of indoctrination. School has been, for some time now, a center of indoctrination. What is it that children are mostly learning now through the public institutions and even through private colleges and public colleges as well? Most of them are turning out to be, because that is what they are being indoctrinated through 12 years of forced schooling and then 4 more years or less or more, depending on whom you speak to, of colleges, they are being indoctrinated in Marxist indoctrination. I mean, the statistics show, for example, that in colleges, more than 80% of all registered professors are Democrats. What does that tell you? The particular liberal bent is going to be present. I mean, you even see it in the man of the street interviews where they go and interview, some of the conservative organizations. They will go and interview some of these college students, and they'll interview them about certain issues. I mean, for crying out loud, look them up. On some of these videos, they even ask these people whom the vice president of the United States is, and they don't know. How can they not know this? How can they not know this? They don't even know who their senator is from the respective state in which they abide. They don't know who their local representative is. They don't know anything about the local city council. They don't know anything about the laws. When they ask them about the Bill of Rights, maybe aside from free speech, they don't know the rest of the Bill of Rights. What does that tell you? Further proof. Now, we'll continue watching the video because I think that she has answered in a substantive manner. I don't want to misrepresent her words, but you'll notice that now the ganging up continues to prove what I said earlier about press and the narratives and the sensationalism, etc. This it becomes more and more stringent. You'll notice that the temperature in the room continues to climb as this debate continues. Now the militant, the activist, the homosexual will voice his rhetorical questioning and his reasoning. Listen to this.
Such a diverse nation and in our towns and in our villages that the school was going to be able to give such a great representation of that, potentially more than you could?
No.
See what I told you? Did you see the way that he phrased this question? Potentially the school can give a better representation about the so-called diversity in our towns, in our cities, in our states, in our nation, etc., better than the parent can. What? Allow me to understand. Let me see if I've understood this. The parents, father, engenders the child. The mother conceives the child. They take care of the child. They give the child a roof over their heads. They provide them with sustenance, clothing, advice, moral teaching, etc., all of this. But all of a sudden, it is the state's responsibility, the government's responsibility now to educate your children, even though it is their hard labor, the parents' hard labor and sweat, and their ultimate responsibility to take care of that child, to rear that child correctly. Interesting. And now notice what he asserts. The school is better equipped to do this than you are. I am going to interpret what he actually meant to say. And this is going to be proven the more that we examine, the more that we listen and hear this clip. But I'm going to interpret what he meant. We don't want you parents instilling in your children Christian values. We don't want you teaching children, your own children, by the way, that homosexuality is a sin. Therefore, we are trying to remove the parent from the equation and place in its stead people whom are favorable to our cause, to our ideas, to our ideology. That's insulting. It is inherently insulting what he just said to this mother. He knows nothing about this mother, and he's presuming that the school can do a better job than she can. That is intelligence insulting. But guess what? When you read the comments on social media, most people don't pick up on this. A few have, but most people don't pick up on this. Most people do not pick up on it. They seem to just say, well, there's another case of homophobia by this young Christian mother. That is what's the term I'm looking to use here? That is the what most people have been reduced to in their mental life. Memes, short ideas that in reality have no detail to them, that omit the truth. In other words, we have a lot of dummies around us. A lot of ignorant people around us. But that's exactly whom these activists are targeting. That's exactly whom these activists are trying to continue to indoctrinate. Because when people like this young mother appear and they defend, in one way, shape, or form, the Christian position on the matter, and they do so successfully, then that person has to be vilified. That person has to be destroyed. That person's character has to be assassinated. That's what happens. Keep this in mind, folks. I mean, I told you it was going to become more and more evident as we examine this. Who is this man to tell this young Christian mother that she is unable to teach? Again, it's all sophistry. It's all a euphemism. Understand that. We've already covered that. But nonetheless, the level of intelligence insulting that he just launched against her is beyond the pale. It really is beyond the pale. Could you imagine if the roles would have been reversed and she would have said that to him? He would have been up in arms. And God knows that the presenters, the hosts on this show, would have similarly denounced her for doing such a thing and classified her as a homophobe, etc., etc., etc. But it doesn't end here. The ridiculousness, the subversiveness of this does not end. Let's continue listening.
No, not at all. I'm the parent. I know my child. I know what my child is capable of. Why would a school's opinion be more than mine? I'm not saying that I would go around teaching everyone's children, but my child, it's up to me for my child to... So I understand my child. Why would I need a school to be teaching my child anything other than what I send my child to school for?
She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. She's got her head on straight. She's absolutely right. But here's the problem. People like her, they denounce the activities of the autocrats, like this militant. These people want greater government control because they can use the government for their own ends, to impose what they desire. She's absolutely right. But then autocrats, despots like this buffoon, like this evildoer, like this sodomite, yes, sodomite, they have to character assassinate people like her because they're the impediment. Keep that in mind. Now, continue listening. Continue watching because this becomes more interesting as this progresses.
Dispute that it is a parent's right to choose what they go to school for and how you educate them, how you raise them. Absolutely, that is it. But I think you're doing your child a disservice by not allowing them to have that education, to see that families come in all different shapes and sizes. We live in such a diverse time.
They're going to see it.
Folks, I have to pause here again. This is very similar to people whom would desire to remove all of the firearms from Americans' hands and in other places in the West. I am a firm supporter of the Second Amendment, but wait a minute. If you read the text of the Second Amendment, it says, shall not be infringed. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In other words, no laws prohibiting people from having access to and owning firearms. No laws. Period. If you say you're a supporter of the Second Amendment and then include a but, you interject a but in there, then don't say that you're a supporter of the Second Amendment. But again, most of these demagogues know that most people won't take the time to analyze the inherent contradictions of what these people are asserting. In the same vein, we examine then this homosexual militant's words. I am in favor. I'm absolutely in favor that sure, the parents said you have to teach the kids. You already heard what he said. But then he follows that up by continuing to assassinate the character of this young Christian mother and saying that she is incapable of teaching her child about the fact that there are homosexuals among us. Notice the hyperbole and, again, the continuance of the insulting nature of his comments and his presumption about this lady's lack of ability to teach her own child. That's not it, folks. That's just the smokescreen. That's just the facade. In truth, and it will come forth because he himself will admit it. He will be forced to admit it because through her rebuttals, she will force him to admit it. It's just that he doesn't want Christian parents to teach their own children that homosexuality is wrong. That's inherently autocratic. That is inherently despotic. Think about that. How can you be in favor of parents teaching their own children the way they see fit, but then you support a policy that violates that very right? And then, to make matters worse, you're insulting the intelligence of those parents the way he does so here to this young Christian mother. See, what we're doing here, folks, we are analyzing, we are examining, just like the Bible says, examine all things, hold fast to that which is good, abhor, abstain from every form of evil. That's exactly what we're doing here. The problem is that we live in such a, many people call it fast-paced society. I happen to think that it's all the opposite. I think people are living too quickly. They aren't living intentionally, but more on that in a future podcast episode. Nonetheless, we find here that we live in such, people want to digest everything so quickly that they don't take time to actually reason things out. They don't take time to filter things out either. Instead of adopting a premise automatically because the person seems, for example, he seems trustworthy, or sentimentally, his argument seems to be moral. No, instead of being more rational about these things, we're adopting this because these demagogues know that it's all based on the facade. If you can present yourself as a trustworthy person, as someone who inherently loves other people and does things for altruistic purposes, etc., then you can simply get away by doing the vicious things that he is doing and people like him are doing. And people will generally will adopt our, what we wish for them to think, how we wish for them to think. That is eventually what happens. And you're seeing proof positive. You're seeing it again in this instance. Again, it doesn't end here. Let's continue watching.
Because they're going to be children
the gay people are everywhere. This is the problem, right? So you're going to be removing them from that situation. However, there is going to be, they're going to get on a bus and that bus driver is going to be gay. They're going to be served food in a restaurant by a gay woman. A gay person may be delivering your child's baby one day.
But
we are everywhere.
Can I pause here for a second? Can I ask you a question? Can I ask the audience a question? What is he implying? I'll tell you what he's implying. That somehow, someone that isn't taught the pro-homosexual stance will somehow encounter a homosexual in the street. Again, this is all hyperbole. This is what we're analyzing what he's saying in essence. Let's say this using this woman's child. What he is saying is that she will never ever teach him about homosexuality, which is wrong. That's inherently wrong because these parents will teach them the Christian matter, the biblical perspective of all of this. But notice that he's misrepresenting the report intentionally. But what he's saying is that when this child confronts or is confronted by a homosexual that's driving a bus, serving their food, etc., that somehow this person will have a tendency, because they weren't taught about the normalization of homosexuality or how normal it is, air quotes, right? That somehow this person will become either violent or antagonistic towards homosexuals. Folks, does this demagogue, does this sophist think? What does he think? What does he think about life? It's a question that my wife often asks rhetorically about certain people. What does this person think about life? Really? This is the hypothetical that he is using to try to disprove what she has said up until this point. Your child can suddenly behave irrationally if you don't teach him about homosexuality. That is in essence what he's saying. Is he joking? But yet, notice also that the hosts of this show, instead of rebutting his vicious hyperbole and his character assassination, they simply support him by the other rhetorical questions that they ask this mother. I told you they were going to gang up on her, and that's just not all. You'll notice that as she tries to expostulate a point later on, they continue to interrupt her, etc. This is all part of the tactics that are used. It's all part of the tactics. Interruptions, not allowing a person to think, about a proper response. All of these things are part of the tactics. And then, of course, the propaganda itself. But notice, what sort of a world is this guy abiding in? What sort of a world? Maybe I should call him a woman. Another case for another day. But anyways, doesn't he want us to identify him as being opposite of what his biology is? Or is that also a thought crime nowadays? I think we should resurrect George Orwell and make him president of the United States if we continue on this path. Anyways, think about this. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous, but it doesn't end here. Continue watching with me.
What makes you think that, because I'm not saying that the school should do it, what makes you think that my child is going around in the world thinking that nobody is gay? Or I never said that I would not teach my child gay. I'm Christian, so we have our own ways of teaching about the world. It's not about living in a vacuum. It's not about saying that this person doesn't exist. It's nothing like that. It's our opinions of the world around us.
I
So when
respect
you're
your
saying
opinion.
that they get on a bus and they meet a bus driver that's gay, or the person that delivers them are gay, or whatever, yes, they are aware of it. I didn't say that I was going to ignore the fact that
I think the
anything
danger
happened.
here-
I'm just saying whose opinion about what is right. You're saying it's a diverse world. It's very diverse. It's always been diverse. But I grew up where it was still very much diverse, but I wasn't told what the school thought was okay.
I'm concerned that the dangers here are taking a child out of this. You are, from the get-go, making them think this is not right, this isn't normal, this is wrong. I'm not disputing what you would teach them.
Did you catch it, folks? I told you eventually she was going to paint him into a corner where he would have to admit what this whole propaganda is about. I told you. I'm pretty sure you noticed it. I am pretty sure that you noticed it. He said, what worries me, what is disconcerting to me, is that they are going to be taught that this is wrong. Exactly what I said earlier. Exactly what I said earlier. Think about it. In essence, he is saying, now he's admitting that the whole purpose behind his support of this legislation, behind these autocratic inclinations, is to try to stamp out, censor out parents, Christian parents, teaching their children, or they don't have to be Christian parents, it could be socially conservative parents, teaching their children the Judeo-Christian ethic, which says that homosexuality is aberrant, despicable, it's abnormal, runs contrary to nature, etc., 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 etc. That's what this is all about. But eventually, she had to take him to a place, she had to corner him to a point where he had to admit it, because otherwise he would have continued to use demagoguery to try to hide what it is that the true intentions behind people like him are, what they truly, the ulterior motivations. Keep that in mind. He said, what worries me is that people like your child and whatnot would be taught that this is wrong. Yes, exactly. That's why parents like myself, parents like this young lady, and others are worried about the ever-encroaching nature of government and people that support the continued autocratization, if you can call it that, the continued encroachment on private matters, on liberty. Because these people, even though they will tell you that they are tolerant, we find that they are inherently intolerant. Only one point of view can be disseminated, and it is their own, and every other point of view contrary to their own has to be squelched. It has to be destroyed. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, please, because that this is what this is all about. Eventually, I told you, I said it. She was going to take him to a place where he was going to have to openly admit it. He was going to have to openly admit it. Doesn't end here. Continue watching.
At home at all.
And even by removing them from that
definitely.
class, there's a suggestion that you don't think that that's...
I would have loved to have had
Is
this
it
at that age.
what they're
removing
taught
them.
and by whom? That's, I'm Tom. I mean, who decides at what age children should learn different things? I think maybe that's part of your concern, isn't it? That there's an age appropriateness
So my
about this.
son is
'Cause
5
they're
years
going to be
old.
very little, some of them, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. He's 5.
Okay, let's pause here for a second, folks. Notice how the presenter, instead of noticing his contradiction, instead of being impartial and simply stating, as asking questions that would demonstrate, as it were, truly what is going on here. Which, by the way, let me pause here for a second. I have another side note. Did you notice in some way, shape, or form that in some way this is beginning to deviate, as it were, from the central subject matter? Some say, no, just give it some more time. You'll notice how this begins to deviate, as it were. We just noticed it in the way that the presenter, the question that she presents, you'll notice that this begins to deviate from the central topic of the debate. Just give it some more time, but just that's a side note. Returning to what I just was analyzing about this presenter, about this host, did you notice how she misrepresented, intentionally so, the point of view of the militant homosexual? In essence, she said that one of his main worries is at what age children are going to be taught this. Notice that she grants no space whatsoever or legitimacy to the argument forwarded by the young Christian mother. It's almost as if the default position, what she's implying, the default position has to be children have to be taught this in school. I use the word indoctrination. Let's use that term. I like it better because it reflects reality more. Children have to be indoctrinated in school. So therefore, since that's going to be the reasonable position, not the Christian mother's position, but the reasonable position will be what the militant homosexual is advancing, then guess what? You know what we ought to do? We should discuss then about at what age would be age appropriate for us to begin to teach him this. How did we move from one point to another? Wait a minute. How did we say that it is legitimate? We haven't even moved on from the fact that this is an illegitimate role that government is trying to fill. This is something that government ought not do, and they're engaging in it. But the presenter, through her questioning, is already giving the impression that the right position, the correct position, belongs to the militant homosexual and not to people like this young Christian mother. That is not the proper way to think about this. The default position should be, we should force this on school children. Now that we've decided that, that's what she's implying through her statement. Now that we've decided that, then let us decide at what age this should be appropriate to teach children. Can I ask you a question? Can I ask the audience a question? When we are speaking about age-appropriate matters, aren't we entering into territory where it might not be a good thing for people aside from the parents to teach their children these things? Isn't that inherently telling you something about that subject matter? Aren't they unwittingly admitting that this issue of homosexuality is a sensitive subject? And that's to put it mildly. But notice, again, it proves what I said earlier. The mainstream media, they're interested in the narrative, and they will bring on people. Let me say it this way. Notice how they present him as the protagonist through their questioning. She's the antagonist. The young Christian mother is the antagonist in all of this. Let's continue watching, and we'll pause intermittently. We'll continue to pause intermittently to comment.
But he's living and breathing two dads, right? This is his normal. And his friends, he goes into school, his friends don't even... Homophobia is taught, okay? You're not born with it. What you are born with is your sexual preference. You are gay or you're not.
I told you that this was going to begin to move away from the central subject matter because he has no way to win that debate when you are debating substantively, when you are arguing with a person that has facts on their side. Notice how all of a sudden he is moving this argument into the realm of people are just afraid of homosexuals, and that's why they have an opposition to the things that we support. That is what he is implying here. Homophobia is taught. Notice that the more and more he's pressed, the more he begins to showcase his inherent antagonism against anyone, in particular Christians, that oppose themselves to homosexuality. In principle, and also through the opposition of legislation that somehow requires others to recognize homosexuality as normal and to violate their religious beliefs while they do, they accommodate the public, etc., if they own a business, etc., etc., etc. Notice how this begins to move away from the central subject matter to... He wants to move it to a place of the reason that there is, that's what he's implying. The reason there is opposition to this is because there are people that are inherently homophobic. I need to pause for a second. Can I ask you all, those of you that are generally opposed to homosexuality, if you're a biblical Christian, if you're a social conservative, etc., are you truly afraid of homosexuals? I have yet to step out of the front door of my house and tremble in my socks because of the possibility of meeting a homosexual. I don't know if this has happened to you. But folks, there have to be people out there because of this. Homophobia is real. There have to be people that live in society. They have to be trembling in their socks before they walk out the front door at the prospect of meeting a homosexual perchance. Yes. You'll pardon my sarcasm, but sometimes sarcasm is needed in order to showcase the ridiculousness of a proposition. Hence, this militant and others like him. Homophobia. Homophobia is taught. Folks, if it is truly, we've seen this in the United States, we've seen it elsewhere, wherever there is an instance that a class teacher decides, is brave enough to speak out against homosexuality, what is the typical response? Those that have ears to hear, they'll answer, those persons are usually persecuted. Should we use some of the prime examples? Baron L. Stutzman in Washington, the florist. Jack Phillips in Colorado. Melissa's Cakes, that family in Washington State, so on and so forth. And some of the other cases that we have not found about because the press has decided not to extend any consideration to those. But it happens on a daily basis where people are targeted. Christians are targeted in specific because of our, let's call it unique. Yes, unique. Because it is Christianity that informs, the Bible that informs that homosexuality is a sin. It is violating God's law, God's design for nature. So they, these militants, Kim Davis, another example that just comes to mind. They target Christians because of our beliefs. And it's not just, we shouldn't just leave it in the level of beliefs. It's the truth. It's the truth. So all of these things are playing a central role. But again, what most people tend to see is just the facade. They just tend to see the facade and they see nothing else aside from this. Now, we're going to have to discontinue. We're going to have to leave this subject matter, the commentary on this for today. I'd like to continue examining this interchange, this exchange between these folks and the presenters and whatnot, because there's more that we can say about this. And the more and more it develops, I think you'll notice that some of what we've been asserting up until now becomes even more evident as the further we progress into this debate. So please join me again on Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the next edition, the newest podcast episode and live stream, of course, now, of the Absolute Truth Absolutely podcast. This has been your host and servant in Jesus Christ, Gio. Please visit the website, jiodcblog.com, jiodcblog.com. We will also inform you when these podcast episodes in audio format are available through SoundCloud, through iTunes, but they will be readily available, posted almost immediately after we finish the live stream. Give it an hour or two, as it were, on the website, jiodcblog.com. Please also subscribe. And what I mean by subscribe is more specifically donate. It'll help us grow the channel and to continue in the endeavors that we believe the Lord would have us engage in. If you've been edified also, if you have been informed by what we have said during this edition, then please let other people know about this channel. Let them know about this live stream in particular. Share it through your social media feeds. It would be a great help to us. And also, more than anything else, it would help us disseminate the truth in a world full of uncertainty. That's all that I have for you on this edition. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until the next edition of the Absolute Truth Absolutely podcast and now live stream, this has been your host and servant in Jesus Christ saying, may the Lord shine his face upon you and Godspeed.